Hi, this is Just Be Well, the channel about whole life wellness. I'm Tom Sult, a medical doctor and functional medicine practitioner.
I'm Elizabeth, a registered nurse and whole life coach.
That's right. And we started this week talking about the mental, emotional, spiritual domain of the functional medicine matrix, and we're going to continue with that. Hi, Jody.
Hi, Jody.
We're going to continue with that, and Jane.
Hi, Jane.
And talk more. She's been reading a very interesting book that we listened to some last night. I've been reading a whole bunch of really interesting stuff about the convergence of science and spirituality through a very famous physicist by the name of Roger Penrose has theorized that consciousness itself actually comes from quantum interactions in brain cells, and I'll talk more about that. It's pretty interesting stuff. And but let's start with your book. What are you reading? And I thought that was really a cool book last night.
Yeah, so the book I am reading is all about the science of connection, but the title is different from connection. I honestly can't remember the title right now, but I could probably look it up for you in about 30 seconds. I just started this book yesterday, and there's a boat going by anyway, so... Oh, it's called Good Chemistry.
And of course, not a soul out here until we go online, and now there's a barge driving by. Yeah, it's literally a barge.
Yeah, it is.
Huh. Anyway.
Barge for the river. So yeah, it's called Good Chemistry, and it's all about the science of connection and really how our lack of human connection and real connection with others has driven our addictions to other things, whether the addictions are to our cell phones that mimic these the beginning stages of a relationship, whether it's addictions to substances, or just anything in life that you use to numb that feeling of loneliness. And you know, I'm just a little ways into this book, but it's really it really speaks to me, and you know, it's along the lines of other things I have read too, but just the connections she makes are really a lot of aha moments.
Reducing your screen time
by 30 minutes a day. Just 30 minutes a day will increase your feelings of happiness. And really, she goes in to talk about how the prescription antidepressants are up 400% in the last 20 years. 400%. And suicide rates are at a 30-year high. And, you know, she correlates this largely with the lack of human connection in social integration. And she talks about some studies that were done on rats where the rat was isolated from every single other rat, and it only saw itself in its cage, and then it had a line hooked up to its jugular that was morphine, and he would hit that morphine all day long until it killed him. Where in the second study there were rats that were like, they called it the rat park, where they could interact with one another and kind of have their you know, normal activities that this type of species does. And even though it was
raves, they were going to raves.
Yeah, and even though they were offered the morphine drug the same, they wouldn't choose it. Right. They would just choose to drink the normal water. They would choose not to have.
So what does that say about our current opioid addiction problem?
And that's exactly what she was speaking of, was the opioid addictions and how that has just raised. But
he's walking around looking at their phone. My phone's over there filming us. Miserable.
And we don't make the connection that it is our devices that are I mean, you know, how many times do we label just even a telephone call as touching base or text messaging? and that is not doing the same. Oxytocin is really the key drug here that we are.
And that requires true eye-to-eye contact, not me looking at my screen and you looking at your screen.
Yeah, or hugging it, basically hugging it out.
Yeah.
Hugging it out. You can really hug it out. And obviously there's other interactions with people and activities that release large amounts of oxytocin, but hugging is a great way to release kind of those smaller doses. Eye contact, things like that. So yeah, I mean,
So I think that's just so huge, you know. In the West, we have all kinds of diseases that are not seen in developing countries. And, you know, talk about heart disease. Well, heart disease is unheard of in Okinawa. At least it was a few years ago. Now, of course, they've westernized largely thanks to a big military base there. But, you know, many of the diseases of the West are just unheard of. And, you know, we say, well, it's the diet. Well, our diet isn't great, but at least in the 1940s, it wasn't that different. But what is very different is our culture and our isolation, because even before cell phones, we had cars. And I remember a conversation when I was just in early college, and I was talking about how everybody gets in their little capsule car, and they isolate themselves and they drive around. And they go, you know, completely alone from home to work, and then they get to work and they're in a little cubicle all by themselves, and maybe they have a tiny bit of interaction at the water cooler, in those days, water coolers. But even that, if you stood there too long, you'd get in trouble, you know. So then back to your little cubicle, and then back into your little capsule, and back home all day long. And that's not normal human behavior. That is not, you know, we are troop animals. You used an interesting word. What was that? Obligate gregarians? What was that word? Do you remember that?
No.
You were too sleepy.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Anyway, obligate gregarians, I think, is a weird word I'd never heard of. But basically it means we need to be grouped together. And, you know, primates, groups of primates are called troops, whether they're monkeys or chimpanzees or bonobos or orangutans or whatever it is. And we need contact.
Yeah, we are actually wired for connection.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, the huge spirituality piece in this functional medicine matrix is, you know, spirituality is connection. It's connection, it's oneness, connection with one another, connection with our environments, with animals, with plants, with the earth, with something greater than us. It's the connection of all of it.
I was writing some stuff yesterday about a new therapy that we're bringing in that, you know, in today's climate, we want to be able to provide effective therapies that you don't have to come to the office for. We can do them by mail, and we can do them remotely and so on. And this is a beautiful energy technique. But while I was doing some research to write about it, I was looking at the Center for Complementary and Integrative Medicine, a department of the National Institute of Health, and they divide holistic health into 5 categories. Well, think about that. Only in the West would we divide holistic health into 5 categories. But really, if you think about it, either from a personal point of view, we, or from a transpersonal point of view, all of us, we, are one. You know, and it's becoming more and more true, even in a scientific way. You know, every electron in the universe is connected. You've probably heard this, Einstein said, spooky action at a distance is about entanglement. Well, every single electron in the universe is part of one field. And by bringing them into close proximity and then taking them apart, they can have interactions with each other faster than the speed of light, in fact, instantaneously. And if you really think hard about it, the entire universe was entangled at the moment of the Big Bang. So every particle in your body is entangled with every other particle everywhere in the universe. And what that really means is that we are literally all one. And the sooner and the quicker we are able to really understand that, the better for humanity, because this division, this finer and finer division, and that's another problem with our devices, is it's creating a finer and finer division. When I was a kid, we had a radio in the car, right? When my kids were kids, we had one device in the car that maybe they could watch a movie on, but they had to choose and decide and compromise and all that. Now every single individual in the car, hopefully not the driver, but every other individual in the car has their own screen.
Yeah.
There's no compromise, there's no discussion, there's no human interaction. Everybody's glued to their own version of Barney or whatever the current thing is, you know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us go through our day like this. You know, looking down at our phones, looking down at our screens, and we're missing those hits all day long of eye contact with somebody else, or a discussion with somebody else. Or maybe, you know, I'm guilty of this, maybe it's my child sitting in front of me trying to have a conversation, and I'm trying to finish up an email quick, or a text message that came in that I feel like I need to respond to right away. They're also missing that, and I think for me, this, you know, has really even opened me more up to my children who have cell phones and who are on their
video
computers
games all day long,
and who are plugged in all the time, and, you know, are using those hits to really, you know, stimulate themselves instead of hits with other people. And as we have come to find out, it's not the same.
You know, one of the lines in the book you're reading was, you can never get enough of a substance that doesn't quite work. So they're talking about, you know, the true endorphins that we get, or the true molecules of emotion that we get when we hug someone or look them in the eye or interact with them truly personally, is a much bigger stimulus and a different kind of, quote, high than taking a drug.
And the satisfaction. The satisfaction is different than, a drug you never quite get it. This, you know,
and so you need more and more and more and more.
Quite satisfies it or suffices it. You need more. You need your phone. You need to check.
And that's what causes the addiction. The addiction is caused because, boy, that last dose of heroin, boy, that almost made me feel good. I'm going to take some more. That last dose of OxyContin, it almost felt good. I got to take some more. And so here we are in this terribly addicted society, the worst addiction crisis that our nation has ever faced, and that includes the 1960s when I was growing up.
And, you know, not only addiction to opiates, alcohol, you know, it's those devices or other type of crutches that we use that maybe we don't even see it as an addiction. Whether it's
your telephone or a tablet or your computer, or it's gambling, or it's alcohol, or it's cigarettes, or it's pornography, or it's, you know, there's a million ways that we can become addicted. But the truth is, all of those, they're not quite as good as the real thing, right?
They're only numbing it. They're not fixing it.
Right.
It's just numbing it, and that's why you know, we continue. Connection really is.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Ruth.
Wearing your mask, that's good. Social distancing and safety on video.
Connection really is the cure for addiction. You know, to become more connected, and that's where being present is so important, because to be present in our environments and to connect with those, because we're around people all day long, I mean, for the most part.
And that's why 12-step programs like AA are so successful, because they're built around social support. But this speaks to a larger thing about health. You know, we're talking about spirituality and health, and you know, the addiction is the tip of the iceberg. That's the worst of the worst, right? But it's affecting all of us at every level. And I like to think that the sort of connection between the spirit world and the physiological world is really our autonomic nervous system. And, you know, when you're in, whether you're in emotional angst or mental angst or spiritual angst, it doesn't matter. It affects your autonomic nervous system just the same. And whether your problem is real or imagined, it affects your autonomic nervous system in exactly the same way. And we were not built to be in fight or flight all the time. But most of us in our society are absolutely locked in fight or flight. We are being chased by saber-toothed tigers or whatever constantly. And that takes a toll, because when you are in fight or flight, you're not repairing things. So you're just slowly falling apart. And, you know, how many times have you thought that? You know, something goes haywire and you just think, God, I am just falling apart. Well, yeah, you are, because you're locked in fight or flight. And so we have to take measures to counteract that fight or flight. And, you know, the constant buzz of your phone is a two-edged sword. You get that little dopamine or whatever surge, but you also get a little bit of fight or flight every time it goes, oh my God, where's my phone? I got to find it. So, you know, you don't get the real dose of dopamine, and you do get a fight or flight buzz from it. So they're not helping. And how do you start to get a centering practice? What kinds of things can people do? You know, and unfortunately, so often, I mean, you know, it's famous. We hear about if you could describe the typical mom, and if you described a Jewish mom or a Catholic mom, you couldn't tell the difference, because they're both, you know, guilt. They're both just stories of guilt, right? And so often we're so concerned about following the rules that even our religious practices sometimes leave us swimming in a pool of guilt. So in addition to our religious practices, what can we do to calm our autonomic nervous system and get a better connection to that larger, greater than self that you were talking about? What kinds of things do you recommend?
I think the quickest fix for you know, getting yourself out of
little
that.
Heroin? Quickest fix?
Quicker, because it's always accessible and it's legal.
Yeah.
And actually it's mandatory to live, is breathing.
Yeah,
And, you know, really it's about inhaling and then exhaling longer than you're inhaling. And that exhaling is what brings you into the parasympathetic. So, you know, goes back to your breathing. And, you know, just taking a breath in and then exhaling for double, whether it's exhaling for double or holding it out for a couple seconds, you know, however you can do that. And what she actually, she just talked about this in the book that I'm reading, that, you know, I've learned about some of this in my yoga practices, but it's about breathing in and out through your left nostril, and how that, you know, then you're breathing more in.
Hopefully you don't have a cold.
Yeah, of your left lobe of your lung, and whether or not that lets more oxygen into your heart. But she just said that that is very helpful for bringing you into the parasympathetic. And then there's always meditation. And some of us think, well, I can't meditate because I can't stop thinking. And meditation isn't really about preventing yourself from thinking. Meditation is just about awareness. It's stopping and being aware of the sensations in your body, and that also includes your thoughts. And it's amazing how once you become aware of your thoughts and you listen to them, they just kind of melt away. So, you know, meditation is also a great way, and I think that for some people it is a little bit intimidating because it is hard to do, but as long as you take that thought out of it, like, I'm trying to, I need to not think, that's really not the goal. It's more about just becoming aware. And I also think yoga is a great way to incorporate all of those, the breathing, the meditation, the movement. And some of us maybe physically can't do yoga, but we can still do some of those stretches and some of those poses at our own pace.
Meditation is really about being compassionate towards yourself, rather than sitting there meditating saying, you know, what a piece of junk, you can't even stop thinking, you're so stupid, what's wrong with you? Or, oh, I just wasted a half an hour because I was thinking about something, I didn't even realize I was thinking. Instead, when you're meditating, and let's say you're doing a breathing practice like was just described, or, you know, maybe you're doing a hearing practice where you're just being aware of the sounds around you, but not having judgments about the sound. So the boat just went by at the beginning of here, not judging, oh, that thing's too loud, just it's a sound. It's just a sound. So in any event, you're doing whatever you're doing, and then you realize you're thinking about your taxes that are overdue or whatever. Instead of going, oh, you moron, you were thinking about the wrong thing, just say, oh, look at that. I was supposed to find myself when I drifted, and I did. Good job. Let's come back now to the breathing or the listening or the mantra or whatever you were trying to focus on. And by being aware like that, you go, oh yeah, I have thoughts. Oh yeah, okay, I'm going to focus back. And then, 18 nanoseconds later, and you go, oh yeah, I'm drifting again. That's okay. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to notice that I'm drifting, so I'm doing it right and bring it back. I'm doing it right because I'm noticing that I'm drifting. So rather than saying, oh, I'm doing it wrong, no, you're doing it right. You're noticing you're drifting. And with time, you don't jump on your bicycle and ride down the street. The way I learned to ride a bicycle is my big brother Stan, he grabbed the seat and he ran down the street as fast as he could with me, and then he let me go. Well, fortunately, the gyroscopic activity of the wheels kept me upright until I got a little slower, and then of course I crashed and burned and cried and carried on. But he thought he did a great job teaching me how to ride a bike. And it's the same thing. You're going to crash and burn when you first start trying to meditate. But over time, the whole idea is if you cannot control your mind, who will? Right? If you can't control your mind, who will? So it is a way to learn to exercise some modicum of control over your mind so that when things do get stressful, instead of going kaboom, you can exercise a tiny bit of volition over that moment between stimulus and response, and you can decide, like, I'm having this emotional reaction. What is this emotional, one of the books I've read recently talks about emotions are like telephone calls. Pick up the phone, ask what's going on. Why am I having this emotion? And then if I'm having an emotion, of anger, it's probably because I really care. And is exploding going to be the thing that really expresses my caring? Or is there a different way of expressing my caring? So, anyway.
Yeah, and there's very frequent days where I try to meditate, and it is about every 4 seconds that my mind is going somewhere. And, then there's those days that I'm meditating and my mind does go places, but I often find it's answers that I've been, asking for, praying for. So, there's an awareness and a listening that also goes in with just kind of, sitting in that space and of mindfulness and meditation. Yeah.
And that's really the whole point of it, is to have insights.
Yep. So listen. It's maybe your time to listen instead of ask or.
Exactly. And you said that beautifully the other day. You were talking about listening, and not only to people around us when we're having conversations, but we need to listen to ourselves. And meditation is that time to listen to ourselves instead of continuously questioning. All of the tapes that we play about being a lousy, steaming sack of dung or whatever.
Or self-doubt.
Self-doubt, all of that stuff. That's talking. Well, let's listen. And that's what slowing down and meditating does. It helps us listen to ourselves. So the spiritual domain, this all, we think, well, gosh, what is spirit? That's like some woo-woo thing out there. But it connects to us.
Yes, spirituality is connection.
It's connection to something greater than ourselves, but also back to us and to one another. And as troop animals, as I mentioned before, those connections are critically important. So I'm very interested in the research around consciousness, because we have no idea what consciousness is, right? We have no idea how it works, where it comes from. And the leading idea is that consciousness arises out of all the complex interactions of the neuron activity. That's, in my mind, it's moronic activity, but most people have neurotic activity, the neuron activity in our brains. And I don't see it that way, and there's some really smart people that don't. There's an idea called panpsychism that consciousness is actually an emergent property of the universe. Everything has consciousness, even rocks and whatever. And this guy by the name of Roger Penrose, who's a physicist at Cambridge, actually a contemporary and collaborator with Stephen Hawking. So those of you who are, probably have heard of him. He's the guy in the wheelchair with the electronic voice and so on. They're actually, they work together. So he has this idea that there are things inside our cells called microtubules, and these microtubules, it appears, are actually quantum transducers, if you will. They're quantum qubits, they're called. And there is quantum information processing going on in our brains that is non-linear and non-algorithmic. So the idea of algorithms is that you could predict what's going to happen, and human behavior is notoriously unpredictable. And so some people have solved the consciousness problem by saying, oh, well, free will is actually just an illusion, and you're programmed, you would do this. Anybody who had your exact information would do this. And I think that's an absurd argument, but that's sort of the dominant argument, that it's, you're a wave function and you're going to do whatever it is you do. And if that's true, then why do we have prisons? Because they were just going to do it anyway. And why do we have schools? Because, there's just all sorts of weird arguments that begin to happen. But with Roger Penrose and his partner, whose name escapes me right now, their theory, which actually is slowly gaining a little bit of traction, it's a minority theory, but it solves a lot of problems of consciousness. It's really quite fascinating. And the numerical crunching, right? He's a theoretical physicist, so he's a math guy, and it allows for lesser consciousness, like think cats and dogs and things like that, and greater consciousness. And the greater consciousness you could think of as God or transpersonal or whatever. But this beautiful theory that's really rests in mathematics gives this range of consciousness that really fits what we see in reality. So I like it, and I like the idea that it leaves room for the mystical, because, as we know, science often is a little bit water and oil with faith. I don't think it has to be, but often it is. So anyway, that is part 2 of spirituality in the functional medicine domain, and trying to help you see some kinds of connections between something greater than yourself and between human beings, and the importance of that to our health. And really, if you look at the book Blue Zones, maybe some of you have heard of that book. It's about cultures around the world that have very long lives. Okinawa is one of them. In any event, all of those, they've looked at the diet and all that stuff, and they really boil down to culture, and they boil down to a sense of place and purpose and meaning. And those are really the most important things in our health, it turns out. So on Friday, we're going to continue. Well, are we going to do Friday? What are we going to do?
Today's Thursday.
Today's Thursday, yeah.
Today's Thursday already.
So we decided that Fridays were a terrible day, because it's nice out now and people want to do things outdoors, and that's why we decided to do noon today, thinking maybe there'd be a few more people around. But I think we're going to skip Friday, and we will see you on Monday, probably at 7 p.m.
Yeah, we could do maybe Mondays at 7, and then if people like, I noticed there's a few different people on right now, so maybe Thursdays
noon.
That way we can.
So we'll do that, and if you have any questions or want to talk more about spirituality and medicine, feel free. Otherwise, we're going to let you go, because what time is it? Well, we've been on about 30 minutes now, so don't want to make this the world's longest video.
If anybody has any comments.
Yeah. And I've been told that I asked that question and then turn off too fast, so I'll try not to do that.
Yeah, we should pause longer, because there is a lapse too from when what we see comes up to when you probably actually do it as well.
So let me talk just a little bit more about this new therapy, frequency-specific energy wellness. Frequency-specific energy wellness. And it's a kind of energy healing, and it can be done remotely. We do need to get a sample from you to be able to process it, but it's actually a biofeedback technique. We interrogate your cells with different frequencies, very specific frequencies, and then the machine measures the current fluctuations and what's called phase angle. That's the angle between the voltage and the current. So it can measure the phase angle and the fluctuations in the current and determine which frequencies seem to be stressing you. And then there is a method for normalizing that. So, we have this physical body, which is composed of bits and pieces and biochemistry, but there's this energetic body as well. And the energetic body needs attention too. And often it's disturbances in the energetic body that will then allow for healing within the physical body. So that's the therapy we're working on implementing. We're very close to it. Just have to wait for one more gizmo. Always a gizmo, right? But in the meantime, she's doing other forms of energy work with essential oils in her office in New London. And then we're also doing the normal biochemical stuff and the customized nutrition, functional medicine, customized biochemically based nutritional interventions based on tests that we do, like an organic acid profile, which measures not if you're deficient in a nutrient, but rather, do you have inefficiencies in using a nutrient? And so, do we need to give you a bigger dose, or do we need to give you a slightly different kind so it can go around or under or over and get your biochemistry working better again? And then, of course, if you're trying to figure out how to implement all that stuff, Elizabeth also does coaching. All right, so I'm not seeing any additional questions. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Ruth and Jody, and for showing up. And we will talk more on Monday. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
And a good weekend.
And a good weekend, yeah.